Hello everyone. In CSC-121 Graphical Python Programming, we are starting week 12. And in week 12, you will be creating a project to display a dialog form. And that dialog form will allow the person running the program to page through the database, what we call navigate through the database. So there are a couple ways to approach that. I'm going to show you a very, very easy way by comparison to what's shown in your book. First, let me flip over to your textbook so that you can see what I mean when I say an easier way than what's shown in your book. So here I am in chapter 9 of the textbook, and if you will notice, this is their form to navigate through the rows in a database table. And if you look at the amount of code, they're not using the QSql library. They're using the SQLite 3 library. They're having to build an SQL statement here. They're having to use a cursor to execute the SQL statement. They're having to, here's just some code to show the first row in the database. And it's just a tremendous amount of stuff to keep up with. Plus they're building their SQL statement in text here as they go. So I'm going to show you another way to do this. And there is not an example out there online anywhere that does this. I actually went through and developed this myself, translating C++ code into Python, and even that did not have an example of how to add a row to the table or delete a row. And if I go back to the textbook for a moment, you'll see that they don't have that either. They just have first, previous, next, and last. They don't have any buttons to add a row to this table. They don't have any buttons to delete a row. So we're gonna, when we finish this lecture, you'll have a working example of something that does more than what's shown in your book with less code and less work. So here's the background on this. I don't know if any of you have used Microsoft Access, but in Access you can create a form, as they call it in Access, and that form will have the navigation buttons on it where you can, it actually has a navigation bar down at the bottom where you can navigate through the rows in the table. In Visual Basic, you can do the same thing. You can create what they call a data-bound form, and that both of those approaches behind the scenes use something called a record set object. And you may have run across that if you're doing any Microsoft calls their database connections, ADO connection. if you have used any of that, then I'm gonna call out some terminology so that you can kind of have something to compare to with Qt. But just know that what we're doing with Qt is cross-platform, works anywhere, works with any database. So we in Qt, instead of having a record set, we use something called a data model. And a data model is what we use to roll through the rows in the table. So here's kind of the sequence of events right here that we will go through. We create a QSql database object, roughly equates to a connection. We create a data model. Really, that's kind of like one line of code most of the time. The model object has a set table method and a set edit strategy and a select method that lets us select the rows. Once we have that model created, we can map, and in Microsoft speak it would be bind, but here we call it map. We map the widgets on your dialog. Your widgets are, when I say widgets, I'm talking most of the time lineEdits. So we map those lineEdits to columns or fields in the database table. Now it says model, but the model is actually connected to a table. So we bind or map those widgets, our lineEdits on our dialog form, to the fields or columns in the database model. And we do that using a data widget mapper. And the data widget mapper is a really neat little object that has next and previous and all these methods that we can call to move to the next row. And we'll hook those to some buttons on a form. So as you hit those buttons and call the methods of the data widget mapper, the lineEdits on the dialog will automatically pick up the new information. And if we use the editable database model, we can actually change the information in the database. It'll update the database automatically. We won't have to do anything. So that's kind of the process. And again, I think I mentioned that this is not, there's not an example for this out there. You're only getting it through this class. So that's something special in and of itself. So okay, so let me go to the module behind course content, and here's what the dialog form is going to look like that we're going to create. Now we're going to use that projects database that we created last week. So you should have a projects database. You should have inside that database a projects table and a tasks table. And you should have inserted 2 rows in there. So right here is, well, here's what that dialog form looks like. And at this point in the class, we've probably created 12 dialog forms. You should have a handle on how to put a line edit. These are all line edits. If you look, see where it says QLineEdit, there's their names. You should have a handle on how to do this by now. I don't need to waste time just designing a form for you in this lecture. You will have the form. Just like these push buttons here. Everybody by now knows how to put a push button on a dialog form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just download the form for task.ui right here. So I'm just going to right click and save that link as, and save it to my flash drive in module 6, and this creating data mapped dialog is what we're doing. So I'm going to save that form down. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save this database, this Python SQLite database that has got our projects and our task tables created. It's also got the rows inserted in there. So I'm going to save that to the same place that I saved my UI. So I've got my database, I've got my form already, my dialog. So at this point I'm going to start creating the Python code. So this is already laid out for us. I've done that already. So I'll go open up the GUI template.py file right here. I'll open that up with Tani and we can get started. I wanted to point one thing out to you here that I just came across today. Had a student that's taken our Python class that's at Mitchell Community College, and they don't have a Python class there, so he was taking one class at RCCC and the rest of his classes at Mitchell. He had a really high resolution monitor, which I think is going to become more common as time goes by. And so the dialog forms and all looked really small on his monitor, and actually he was even getting an error when he tried to run a pop-up dialog. So after much research, I found these two attributes that we could set, and that fixes his problem with the high resolution monitor. And I think it's a wise thing if you had a Microsoft Surface with a high res screen, or you had a really high DPI monitor and video card, you might run into this same issue. So I'm just gonna, from now on, put these lines in the GUI template, and they'll be there to take care of that problem. So I put some comments in there explaining what I had done and why. So that enables some support where if you are using a really high resolution monitor, that it will work. So let's get started with this. First off, we'll need to connect up our UI. So we'll change that right here. That's going to be form for task, and to use our database, we're going to need to add the from PyQt5 dot just PyQt5 import QTSQL. That's our library for SQL stuff. And then after Q application, we're going to need to add the Q data widget mapper and the Q message box. Okay. Now, actually, the high resolution stuff was actually he was getting an error when he tried to show a Q message box object. So that code fixes that. So, okay, so we've got our UI. Here's where we're going to need to add our connection to our database. So we can go ahead and put our connection stuff right here. So self.connection equals QT QSql QSql database dot add database. This is the same stuff that we did in the other examples that we did last week, but just as a reminder, if you were using Oracle or Access or some other SQL server, you'd be changing this right here to match whatever type of database you were going to use. That might be the only line you had to change in the program. Okay, self.connection.set database name. This is our Python database that we created. That's Python SQLite is what we called it. Pretty sure that's what it is, but we'll check here. Python SQLite.db. Yep. Okay, so here's our code to handle the situation if we had some sort of issue getting a connection. If we didn't get a connection open, then Q message box. Critical. Cannot open database. Unable to establish a database connection. Okay, you can go ahead and add more stuff here to be more descriptive. How about this? For more information is good enough. Let's see, I want to skip a couple lines here. We'll go ahead and put our message box button here. That's our one button that we're going to allow them to have. Okay. So, none cannot open database. Yeah. Okay. This is the title that will show at the top of our little pop-up. All right, and if that happens, then we're going to need to end the application. Q application instance quit. That exits the program and nothing else happens. Okay, so at this point then we're ready to get cranking with our setting up our database model. So we'll go ahead and create a class level variable here or property. Self.model. I'm making this a class by a class property by putting self in front of it so that we can share it among all the different methods that we write in this my form. So making it self lets me do that. So we'll automatically have access to it in each of the other methods. So, okay, QSql Table Model. Okay, this is a good point to point you to some other things. Let's go ahead and save this as the right name here. File, save as, and let me get in the right class here. Okay, we're going to save this file as form for task. .py. Okay, so let's talk about this QSql table model. Right here, and when I finish the video, there'll be a thumbnail image here that I'll put in so don't get confused. But right here are two good links. What we're doing right now pertains to this SQL model classes. So I'm going to click that link, and when I do, you'll see that it opens this up. And basically we have three choices that we could use here. We could use the QSql query model. If we did that, we would have a read-only model. So we wouldn't be able to change something in the database. Okay? So if you want to be able to modify things in the database, then you wouldn't use this one. Okay, so down here, these last two, you can actually change things in the database if you use one of these two models. You see this says this SQL Table Model says a read-write model that works on a single table. Okay, and here this QSql Relational Table Model works with anything that you throw at it, basically, including tables that have foreign key out there. So this one right here, the QSql Table Model, is the simplest one to use because we don't have to write a query with it. If you did this one, you would have to write a query for this to work. So, okay, so you can read the rest of this and you can see that what's going on with this. And you see right here, QSql query model, it shows them writing an SQL query to select something out. Now this is C++ code. I told you that all the examples are pretty much C++, so I had to make what we're doing right now, I had to translate from C++ into Python, and I didn't really have an example of what we're doing, so just to let you know. So alright, so we talked about what the three types of models were, and so we can go back here, and now's probably as good a time as any to just test this out, because we have got this form. I downloaded this form that has all the line edits on it and the buttons, and if we typoed anything here, it's better to find out about it early rather than late. So I'm a big fan in testing programs as you go along. So let's run this again and see if we're getting a, okay, cannot open database. It does not like something about my syntax right here, and that should have been a giveaway right here where I've got the quote in front of none. That's not supposed to be there. So okay, so nothing there. By the way, this is where you would pass self or a reference to your form if you wanted this to be a window modal message box. I don't. I want it to be application modal. I want the whole application to stop. So that's why I'm passing none to it here. Okay, we'll save that and try it again. And I left out a dot right here. See why I like to test this stuff early? Okay. And it's saying name Qt is not defined, so I need to add one more import there up at the top. So let's go ahead and get that import added as well. From PyQt5 .qt core import Qt. Okay, I had forgotten that I needed that so that I would have these constants right here for the high DPI stuff. Okay, let's try it one more time. Qt QSql. I think that's just QTSQL. Sorry. Let's see where that is. Right there's my typo. Okay. There we go. So there's our dialog. We're going to keep working on this, but I wanted to make sure that everything is hooked up, and it is. So everything's good to this point right here. So we have created our model property that we'll share among all the methods. So next we'll call a SetupModel method, self.setupModel. Okay. Now we haven't written this method yet, so we could go down here and set it up if you want to. We could go ahead and do that. That's what it'll look like. And we can go ahead and put some code in it, but just know we'll have to come back up to the top and do some other things. But we can go ahead and write our code here. So let's go ahead and set up that model just so you kind of know what we're doing. Self.model.setTable. We're going to work with the task table. Okay. Now where am I getting this stuff? Where did that come from? Well, if you go back and look at this stuff right here, let's see. Right here, if you see where they're set in the table, that's what we're doing. We're setting the table. So, okay. Just trying to show you where you could find that in the online documentation. So, back to this. Okay, once we've got the table set, then we need to set our edit strategy. So, the edit strategy says as the person is clicking the buttons and moving through this this database table, we want to control how those changes are done. Okay, we're going to set our edit strategy, and the constant for that is QSql dot QSql table model dot on field change. Okay. So what this is saying is anytime we change something, it's going to go ahead and save it to the database. So making it a real-time connection. So that constant is QTSQL dot SQL table model on field change. Okay. And next we can just select our rows. Self.model.select. We don't have to write a query here if you want every single row in the and every single column in the task table. We don't have to put anything here. If you go back and look at the online documentation, you'll see they didn't put anything here either. Okay, they did use a filter. If they only wanted, apparently they only wanted folks with a salary greater than 50,000 there. Okay, but that was all that they were doing. So, okay, back to our code here. So that's all of our setup model. So that's what we're calling right here, self.setupModel. Okay. So we can jump back up to where we were writing code and continue on with the next thing. Now we're going to set up our mapper. And our mapper is what's going to hook all of those line edits that were on that form. It's going to hook all of those line edits up to the columns in the database. So first we'll create a mapper. Self.mapper is as good a name as any. We're making that up. So equals Q data widget mapper. Got to pass self to it when we create it. Q data widget mapper. Okay, so now we've got a mapper. Okay, and our mapper has to know what table it's working with. So that's where we're going to tell it set model. And the model that we created was self.model. Okay. So if you look right here, here's where we created a QSql table model. And we gave it this name. Here's where we called everything to actually set it up. Okay. And here's where we're using it. So now that we've got that done, we can map all of our line edits. So once you get one done, you can kind of copy it. Self.mapper.add mapping. self.ui.lineEditID. And I didn't spell line right. LineEditID. Now, this is coming from our GUI. And where did I get this name? LineEditID. If you go back and look, I'm trying to find my, okay, right here it is. Okay. If you go back and look, right here is the one that we're adding a mapping for right now, ID. And see where it says LineEditID? That's what we're into. Okay. So LineEditID is going to get mapped to self.model.fieldIndex.ID. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this. If you looked in our database with DB Browser, you would see that we had a column in that task table. You'd see that we had a column called ID. Now, ID is the first column in that table, so just so you know, we could have put just a 1, not a 1, but a 0 right here because it's 0 based. But if you ever go back and change anything in your table, like say you added another column or something, then all of the code could get messed up if you were using a number here. You'll see a lot of people use a number right here. I don't do that. I've learned the hard way. So when I use this, what this does is it goes out there and looks at the model, and it looks for a column in that model that matches this ID. When it finds it, it returns the index of it, which will be, the first one would be 0, so it's going to actually return a 0. So tried to explain what I was doing there. And let's see, self.ui.LineEditID. Okay, so that's the first line right here. You'll notice that this parenthesis right here matches this one. This parenthesis matches that one. We've got our dots. We've got our comma. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to copy this line because we've got a lot of those line edits that we need to map. And we can just keep copying it. And then we'll go in and change them. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to need to change two things on each of these. I'm going to need to change this, and I'm going to need to change that. So the next one is LineEdit name. And the column name in our database is name. Okay. The next one is going to be LineEditPriority. And you can see that we did this one right here where it says LineEdit name. Now we're doing LineEditPriority. And of course, that's just priority. Okay. Next one is going to be, let's flip back over and look. Project ID. Project ID. Okay, we got priority. We need to get status ID. Actually, let's do that one first. Status ID. And the column in the database is just status underscore ID. Okay, now we're to priority. LineEditPriority. Okay. And the database, let's see. Actually, I already had that. Okay. I think I'm getting out of whack here. Let's go back and look at our picture again. Name, priority, project ID, status ID. Yeah, I'm not following the order that I had them on my form here. Priority, status ID, project ID. Okay. Priority, status ID, and then project ID. Is that right? Actually, project ID was first. The order doesn't really matter, but it's easier to make sure that we aren't missing something if we follow that. So let's do this. Project ID. Okay, this is status ID. And this is status ID. Okay, so priority project status. Priority project status. Is that all of them? No, we got begin date and end date. Begin date and end date. Okay. LineEdit. That's begin capital with a capital B. Okay. Okay, and I'm just going to copy that line. Paste it, and that will change to end date and end date. Okay, so let's compare this and make sure that everything is there that's supposed to be there. Name, priority, project, status, begin date, end date. Okay, looks like they're all there. Okay, so we've added all of our mappings. Now we need to connect our buttons. And they're going to be similar to this line. So I can save myself some typing and do this. And the buttons that we're hooking up are push button previous and something else. Push button previous, push button next, push button exit, add and delete. Oh, we got a bunch of buttons to hook up here. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, push button. All right, push button previous. Connect. These are going to be connected to our data mapper. So self.mapper, okay, that we created right here. That's one of the really nice things about what we're doing. We don't have to write this code at all for toPrevious. We're using something that's built into the mapper. The example that they did in the textbook, you'd have a bunch of code that you were writing to do that. Okay? So, copy that. Paste it again. Now, where could you find out about this? How would you know to put toPrevious there? Well, if you come back to the course content, database handling, This is the lecture that we're working through right here. And you see where I've got the link to the data widget mapper details right here. Oops, I guess I need to fix that link. It doesn't like the fact that that link is an external page. Well, you'll get to see me fix a link here just so I can use it. Open in a new window. There we go. So this is our data widget mapper. And if you look right here, here's the slot that we're connecting to. Remember? Signals and slots. We're connecting the signal from our previous button to the two previous slot of the data widget mapper class. Okay? So that's where that came from, and you'll notice that there are all these are already done for us. 2 next, 2 last, 2 first. So all those are already done. That's what's so nice about using this as opposed to having to write code. Okay, we've got another button. I think you'll probably need to do the next button. Yep, push button next. And the data mapper method that we're going to connect to, or slot, is to next. And then we've got another button to hook up, and that is to a method that we'll need to write let me explain what we're going to need to do next here. So we've connected this button, previous, we've connected next, okay? As you roll through the database, if you hit the end of all the rows that are in that table, we don't want the next button to be available. You shouldn't be able to click next if you've hit the end of the rows. There are no more rows in your model or in your table, so this button should be disabled. So we're going to write some code here to handle that. And it's not much code, but it should be there just so that we're taking care of that situation. So self.mapper.current index changed .connect self.update buttons is what I'll call it. So we need to write this method, but let's talk about the current index changed signal. When we click this push button next or push button previous, the index in the database, the row that we're on, changes. Okay? This signal right here is fired or emitted, and we can use that to keep our buttons updated. So let's go ahead and write some code to keep our buttons, whether they should be available or not. It's just 2 lines of code. Self.update buttons. Okay, Now, when this signal right here is emitted, it gives us some things. When it's emitted, it actually passes two things to us that we need to capture right here. It passes, actually it just passes one thing to us, self and row. Okay, it tells us what row it was on. We have to pass self to every method that we create for our object. So, okay, so if self.ui push button previous, okay, dot set enabled, so let me talk about what I'm doing right here. This is a Boolean condition. If we're trying to move beyond row 0, row 0 is the first row in the table or in the model. If we try to go to a -1, that will cause our program to blow. So if whatever row we're trying to navigate to is not there, is less than 0, this is going to be false. So it's going to set our button enabled to false, which will gray the button out. So I'm going to copy this code and just change one thing about it. Right here, instead of previous, we're going to work with next. And with the next one, it's a little bit more of a calculation, but not much. Self.model.row count gets us the rows, and -1 from that, because we're the row count. Remember that it starts counting at 0 for rows in the model. So if we're working with row count, it doesn't start at 0, it starts at 1. So that's why I'm having to subtract 1 here. And so we need to make this a condition and say row is less than row count. So as long as we haven't hit the end of our rows, our next button will be enabled. Okay? So at this point, I think we've got enough code written to where we can test out our program. I do want to go ahead and close the connection to our database. So right here in our exit method, I'm going to do a self.connection.close so that we're not leaving our database open. So that's an important line right there. And we made our connection right here. Okay? So if we've done everything right, and who's to say whether I typoed something or not here, but we'll start debugging it. If we've done everything right and we've got our table out here that has 2 tasks and 1 project in it, then we should be able to roll through our task in that table. Now, in case you're wanting to see that database again, we can open it up. Just so we're clear on what we're paging through here. Here's our database. So I'm going to open that. browse data, you can see I've got three tasks out there. No, that's 3 projects. Hang on. Task. Oh, we've got a lot of tasks. Got 7 of them out there. Okay. I went ahead and added a few more just so we could play with this. Okay. So we've got 7 tasks out there that we can page through. Okay. Now, one thing when you're looking at these databases, always come out of DB browser or close the database because it can lock things. So, word to the wise, I've run into that before after banging my head against the wall for a long time. Okay, let's see if we got all these things hooked right. There's end date, begin date, status ID, project ID, priority, name, ID. That looks good. We've got an update buttons method right here. Okay. And we've got our model set up. I think this is good to go right here. This is going to automatically populate these things. So here we go. Let's clear that shell. I think I have an error. Okay, let's see what I need to fix here. Update buttons, self and row, and it doesn't like something there in my update buttons method. So let's see if we can figure out what I messed up there. Oh, duh. Def. Okay, didn't like that, did it? There's our dialog, and let's see if we're getting anything. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks like our button right here, I've got something wrong with that. Did you notice it was never enabled? So let's go back and see if we can figure out what we did wrong with that button. Oh, it's row greater than 0 instead of less than. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Previous. Okay. Looks like I need to, when I'm first starting it up, did you notice my button wasn't right there? Looks like I'm going to need to potentially set my row equal to 0 or something at the start. It's like my when I first opened this database up, the table or the row is not tracking correctly. Let's run this one more time. I think I need to probably call this when I first create my model. So let's run this one more time and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, you see how I'm not anywhere right now? Okay, when I do that, I get to my first row. Okay, so it looks like I need to actually call my to next or to first. Okay, that's where I'm what I'm missing right there. So I need to go to the first row because I'm not there right now. Right before we show this, we'll go ahead and do that to first. Right here. Self.mapper.to first. The reason it was empty is we had never navigated to a row. This is going to put us on the first row in the database before we actually show the dialog. And if you want to go ahead and set the title on that form, we can do that too. Okay. So again, the reason we were seeing that blank row there when we first fired our form up is I didn't put anything to move us to the first row. So see how it's got the first thing in there now? See how our button is disabled? Because we can't go less than the first row in our table. When I hit next, now both buttons are available. We can keep next and through there. When we hit the last row, you see how this one got disabled? Okay, you're probably on to now that we never did anything for add and delete. So we need to write some code and connect these up and we'll be done with this project. So let's finish this up. We need to do a delete row. So we'll connect that up next. Okay, we'll connect our delete, push button delete. self.ui.push button delete .connect, and we'll connect that to a delete row. Okay, let's go ahead and while we're here, just go ahead and connect up our add button too. And that's a collect. And we need a button for this, or a method for this, we'll call it add row. So we've got two methods left to write and we're done with this. And this is a whole lot less code than what you would have if you were doing the stuff in your textbook. So def dot, is that the way I spelled it up here? Delete row. Yep. Okay, this is just one line of code, so not bad here. Self.model dot remove row. Remember this method that we were using to keep our button states correct? This button returns whatever row we're currently on in the database. So this self.model.remove row will get rid of whatever row number we're pointing to right here. And that is all the wicked code to delete a row. So it's a little more code to add. The add is probably the more complicated one of the bunch here. Okay, we've got our add. So adding is a more complicated because we have to do some calculations to make this row get in there at the right spot. So first we'll get our row that we're currently on. Okay, that's the row that we're currently on. Okay, I'm going to insert a row. Insert row expects the row that you want to insert after. So we're telling it we want to insert after whatever row we're currently on. Okay, this is going to set our current index to the row that we just inserted. Now right here, we've got to populate the items. If you remember when we created this database, certain things we said cannot be null. I'm going to go ahead and populate the ID. The ID can't be blank. So the ID is going to be whatever row we were on plus 1. Okay. And this set text expects a string. It would blow if I didn't convert it to a string. Now this is the name of our project, or our task, sorry. And we don't know what that name's going to be, but we can put something in there so that when that row is inserted, it has something in there so that the database won't throw an error. Okay, and then the person running the program would need to type over that to make it whatever they want it to be. Priority, we'll just leave that empty unless you want to make a priority. The project ID, remember project ID is a foreign key. So it's got to have something in there, and we know that there's a project 1 at least. Okay, so we can default it to project 1, and the person running the program would need to change it if they want it to be for a different project. And this line right here actually saves that row into the database, because, and we have to do that because when they click the add row button, when this code finishes after they've clicked that button, we need to have that row in the database. Otherwise you'd have to put some kind of flag up there on the dialog form and say row not saved. and pop a message up asking them, do you want to save this row? What we're doing right here is we're just going ahead and plugging that row in and actually saving it right there. So with that, I think we've got everything there that we need. Let's try it out. So we can next through. If you want to add one after 7, we'll click add. You see our new task, so that's in there now, and we can change this to say just added by Ken. We'll give it a priority of 1, status of 2, and we'll make the begin date 4-10-2020. And that task will be over 4-11-2020. Okay. And so previous, next, there it is. So there's all of our rows that we just added. You want to try the delete button out. Let's get rid of number 7 here. That'll leave us a hole in our database, but what the heck. Delete, it's gone. Okay, 7's gone, there's 8. Okay, if we exit, we can start it up again. Next, and see 7's actually gone now. 6, 8. So 7's gone. We deleted it. So that's the end of this example. So you can see basically the mechanics of it were that we created the model. We created a widget mapper. We set our mapper to our model. We added mappings for all of the LineEdits on there, and then magic happens. It takes care of keeping them changed all the way through. Each time we clicked a button down here for to previous or to next, everything changed automatically. We didn't have to do it like they're doing in the textbook. The textbook did not show you at all how to delete a row. Didn't show you how to add a row in a form like this. So I will tell you that there's another example out there that I have done right here. This one, I used a combo box on the dialog, a combo box. So project ID referenced the projects table. You recall it's a foreign key. So I made project ID a drop down that automatically populated the project IDs from the projects table. So that is more complex. You couldn't use a SQL table model for that. You remember, if we use a foreign key, you had to use the QSql relational model. So there's more code here in this example because we have that combo box, and you can see what it looks like here. I'll open it up in the text editor just so you can see. Right here, I put some comments in here so you could see what I changed. Here's where we had the one we just did. We had QSql Table Model. If you're going to use that foreign key in the projects table and populate something, then you need to use the QSql relational model. Here is an important concept. If you're going to use that foreign key, you have to tell the mapper what it's getting that information from. And so you'll see in here I had to create a delegate. When we get to that part of it, you'll see down here I'm setting the relation. I'm telling it that I'm setting a relation. The relation is that the projects table ID, and I'm populating the name in the combo box. Okay, so not a whole lot of extra code, but this set item delegate to get the project description. See, instead of showing project number 1, 2, 3, or 4, I'm actually showing the name of that project in the combo box. So the drop down. So this is going to have the project name in it instead of a number. Okay. So right here, this is setting the relationship. This is what's linking it right here. So you can look that over. I'm not going to do a video on that because you don't have to do that in the project. If you decide to do this in the project that's assigned to you, that's extra credit. So that's up to you if you want to go down that road. All right, good luck with the project this week.